Hi, welcome to the first episode of this short tutorial where I have decided to talk about error boundaries in React applications. So this is a rather, advanced topic, and I am assuming you are already familiar with the concepts of developing web applications with React. And if that's not the case, you can, watch the other videos, the other playlists that I have on my channel. But if you are already familiar with React and you want to specifically know about error boundaries and you want to know how you can implement error boundaries inside of a real application, this is the perfect place. This is going to be probably, a tutorial with 2 episodes, maybe 3 episodes, where I am going to walk you through the concepts about error boundaries and how you can set up an error boundary inside of your application. I have prepared my notes. As you can see here, I have created a very simple React application using Vite. I am running this application on my local machine on this port, and I have the application on this other display that I've got, and it is this is an instance of VS Code, and I've got this application called my book app. I have basically created a Vite application, a React application using Vite, and if you take a look here, you see that I do not have any specific dependencies added to the project yet. And then what we are going to do, as always, we are going to create branches for each episode, and we're going to talk about the topics of each episode, implement the code in that branch. My primary focus during this tutorial is going to be error boundary. So I'm not going to talk about the things that I am assuming you already know. Things like props, creating components, and things that are related to React. So I assume you already know how to develop React applications, and I'm not going to talk about those components that we're going to create a lot. But when it comes to error boundaries, we're going to dive deep. We're going to talk a lot about the code that we implement when we want to work with error boundaries. Let's get started. So yeah, as I told you, we're going to create a React application using Vite with one single entity called book, and we're going to talk about error boundaries and how we can implement them. But first, let's talk about error boundaries a little bit. Let's see what they are and why they are useful. So, error boundaries are actually React components that catch JavaScript errors anywhere in their child component tree. They can log errors, something that we will probably explore. They can display a fallback user interface or UI instead of crashing the application. So whenever you create a React application, chances are the application will crash because of some JavaScript errors. If you want to prevent the application from crashing, you can create error boundaries, and you can wrap your components inside of those error boundaries. So if there is an error in your code, the application will not crash. So as I said, this will help prevent the entire UI of the application from breaking when one part of your application fails. So React class components are used to create error boundaries. So we're not going to implement our error boundaries using functional components. We're going to use class components. And I assume you are already familiar with class components, right? Now, the application that we're going to build is a small application that can show a list of books. Each book can throw an error. We're going to simulate that. And then we are going to, of course, have an error boundary to catch those errors and show a friendly message instead of crashing the whole application. This is the code you need to run to create the application that I have right now. So as I said, I have created an application called My Book App using Vite, and then I have installed the dependencies. I'm assuming you are already familiar with this workflow. And this is the application that I've got, And right now I am on branch number 1 and I am going to create the different parts. The application will have, different folders. For example, one folder that we're going to create is called components. Inside of that, we're going to create our book list component, our book component, and our error boundary component. So let's talk about the error list book list component. As you can see, we have a list of books, right? We are not communicating with the backend API for now, and then we will simulate an error on the third book, right? And if you take a look here, we are creating this template where we are mapping through each book, and for each book we are showing the title and the ID. And then there will be another component called book. We are going to create that as well. This is the book component. The book component, as you can see, is very simple. It's like a function component that will take a title, right? A title, and if the title is error book, it's going to throw an error. Otherwise, it's going to return the title. And we are using this book component here. For each book inside of this array, we are calling this book component coming from this code, right? And as the prop for title, we are passing the title of that book, and we are also passing the key. So let's go to the let's go to the code and install and create our book list component as well as our book component inside of the components folder. So here inside of src, I'm going to create a new folder called components, and the first file that I am going to create is called booklist.jsx, and I am going to write the code for book list component. This is going to be a very simple component that will show an array of books using the other component that we are going to create. So this is the book list component. We're going to return the title book list, and for each book inside of the books array, we're going to call the book component, and then we are going to actually pass in the title, as I told you, as well as the key. Now let's create the book component. So book.tsx, I'm gonna change this to JSX. So the book component, as I told you, is going to be responsible for creating that element inside of our book list. And if the title, which is a prop for this book component, is error book, it's gonna simulate an error by throwing this error object. So this is the book component and the book list component, and we are, by the way, exporting these these two components from this file, right? So I'm exporting the book as well as the book list. Now let's continue with our notes. The next step is to create our error boundary. React only allows class components to act as error boundaries. This is very important. So you need to create class components for error boundaries. React 18 might eventually have a hook, but not yet. We're not going to talk about that. Now let's talk about the thing that is happening here inside of this error boundary, and then we are going to implement this. So I am creating a class component called error boundary, which is extending react.component. Here I've got the constructor with the props, and then I am setting this state to an object which has two keys, right? Has error to false, error to null. And then I have different functions, like for example getDerivedStateFromError, componentDidCatch, and then finally the render part. Let's talk about each one of these little by little. I've got chunk by chunk explanation about the error boundary component and I am going to talk about each part. So the first part is easy, right? We are importing React to use React.component, and of course JS6. This is necessary for creating class-based components like error boundaries. Then we are creating a class component. This is our class component. The name is error boundary. It extends React.component, making it, a React component, and this will help us to catch any errors, any JavaScript errors inside of the child components of this error component. The next step is creating the constructor and the initial state of this, error boundary. So here we are calling super.props to initialize the parent component class. And then we are setting the initial state. Has error to false means no error has been caught yet. Whenever, the error boundary object or class or type is created. Error null means that right now we do not have any errors, but we will have the error object here if something goes wrong in the code. The next step is this function. So getDerivedStateFromError. This is an static function. So React automatically calls this method when a descendant component throws an error. So we are going to have a descendant component for this error component. For example, the book component. Whenever the book component throws an error, if you take a look at the code one more time, the book component has the potential to throw an error. So whenever a child component throws an error, React will automatically run this function. And as you can see, it returns an updated state. As you can see here, we are returning an updated state. And then we are indicating the error that we caught, right? We are, indicating that actually we have an error, right? Indicate that an error has been caught. And then we are storing the error object itself to be used further down the component in the render function. So this method is a static, so it doesn't have to access this. The next step is componentDidCatch. So componentDidCatch, this is a lifecycle method. As you can see, it has two input parameters, error and info. You can, for example, do some logging here. Right now, I am simply writing something to the console log. So what it does, called after an error is thrown in a child component. Whenever an error is thrown in, for example, the book component, this function, this lifecycle method is going to get executed. Error is the error itself, and info contains a component, the stack trace, which contains useful information that you can log. And then this is the perfect place to do some logging, right? To, for example, an external service or to the console, as we are doing inside of this example. The next step is to render the fallback UI or children. Of course, we do not want to crash the application whenever an error occurs. So we are going to do this. Take a look. We are going to check whether we have an error or not. If we have an error, we are going to return this. Otherwise, we are going to return this.props.children. Let's take a look at the explanation. If has error is true, it means there is an error. It renders a fallback UI with a red warning message and displays the error message. So if there is an error in the state, if this flag is true, we are going to return a div with a heading as well as a paragraph tag, right? Otherwise, we render, the children. So basically, it means the components that are going to get wrapped inside of this error boundary component. Now, what I want to do is to actually implement this component now that we have some, rough idea of what it is going to do. We are going to create the error boundary component inside of the components folder. So here, I'm going to create error boundary.js6, and then I am going to implement this class component. It is called error boundary. It extends React.component. First, the constructor, the initial state has error false, error null, getDerivedStateFromError. This is an static function that will get executed whenever we've got an error. So we are going to return a new state. The lifecycle method, componentDidCatch. This is the perfect place for doing, some logging if you want. Here we are simply logging to the console, and finally the render. If we have an error, then we are going to return this fallback UI. Otherwise, we are going to render the children of this component, which is going to be basically the code that is going to get wrapped inside of this error boundary component. Now, let's continue. Now we need to wrap our component, book list component, inside of the error boundary. So take a look at the app.jsx file. Basically, if you take a look here, you will see that we are importing the book list and error boundary, right? And then we are rendering the book list, but the book list component is wrapped inside of the error boundary component. So this book list is considered as the child of this getErrorBoundary component. It is wrapped inside this error boundary. So whenever we encounter an error inside of the book list or book, because book is another component that is used inside a book list, whenever we encounter an error inside a book list or book, what we are going to do is to invoke that, fallback UI in the error boundary, and instead of the application being crashed, we will see that fallback UI. So first, what I want to do is to remove the CSS styles of the application, and then inside of this, I'm going to remove this, and as you can see, the application gets updated because I am, running the application using Vite. So whenever I make a change here, I will immediately see the, update. Now let me write the code for the app.jsx, importing book list and error boundary, then returning the app component, and then as you can see, I am wrapping my book list component inside of the error boundary. Now take a look at the application. The application encountered an error, but instead of the application being crashed, I am seeing this fallback UI. And if I go to my console, I see, the logging that I did inside of the error boundary. Now, if inside of the code, I comment out this piece of code and then only render the book list component, because we have an error, the application will crash, right? The application will crash, and I don't see any fallback UI here. The application crashed completely. But with the error boundary in place, what is happening is that whenever something goes wrong, as you can see here, we are seeing a fallback UI. And this is perfect. Even though we have an error, the application didn't crash. So we're running the application and 2 books rendered, right? Then there is an error message, something went wrong, failed to render book. So let's talk about the concepts one more time. The concept inside of an error boundary component. getDerivedStateFromError. This is a lifecycle method used to update the component's state so that the next render shows a fallback UI. Number 2, componentDidCatch. This is used when you want to log some error. It is a lifecycle method. There is a service called Sentry that you can log some errors to. We're not going to talk about that in this video at least. Then we've got this props.children, which refers to the children's the children components inside of this error boundary. And then the limitation is that when you want to create error boundaries, you need to create class components, not functional components. So The other thing that we can talk about is wrap each book inside of its own error boundary. So take a look here. Right now, what we are doing inside of the book list component is that with the book list component, we are invoking the book component each time. And then we are, using the error boundary inside of the app.jsx. But it is also possible to use the error boundary inside of the book list. So basically what I want to do is to comment out this piece of code, and then we are going to go to the book list, and here, right here, we are going to create the book, the error, boundary component. We are going to get rid of this, and then the error boundary is going to be put here. So what this does is that if you take a look, for the first two books, everything will get rendered perfectly. But for the third book, instead of seeing the UI of the book component, you see this fallback, UI. So this is also another approach. If you want to have a more granular control over the content of the book list component, you can wrap each book component inside of an error boundary. So if anything happens, you will see the fallback UI for that specific book, and if there is no error, you will see the UI of the book component. This is also another approach that you can take. So let's summarize the content of this episode. We talked about error boundaries. They're useful when you want to prevent your app from crashing when something goes wrong in a component. You must use a class component for the error boundary, and you need to use it to wrap risky components that you might crash, and that might bring down the whole application because of some unpredictable scenarios. You can wrap those inside of your error boundary, and you can be sure that even though that component might crash, the application will stay functional. Thank you so much, guys, for staying with me till the very end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and stay tuned and keep watching the next video as well. Thank you.